During my son's wedding, the bride suddenly hissed at me, "Get out of here and don't come back. You're not welcome here." I just smiled and said, "All right," I said, "I'll go, but I won't be leaving alone." Her smug smile faded when she saw who was coming with me. Color drained. The glass in her hand trembled. She lost control. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The room did not breathe after that. A ripple passed through 200 people and then stilled like wind smoothed over a lake. I stood with the mic in my hand and felt the weight of it settle into my palm. My son Mason watched me from the head table. The new bride turned toward the photographer as if a fresh angle might hide what she had just said. I did not toast. I asked for 10 quiet minutes with my son. Just us. A library down the hall. It would not take long. I could feel the folder against my ribs. Tabs, dates, a notarized affidavit. A transcript that should never have needed to exist. Her words lived inside it, cool and clinical. 18 months, after the prenup matures. He believes I love him. People mistake calm for emptiness. Mine is engineered. I am Grant Ellison 66. I spent 4 decades turning lines on paper into structures that do not fall. When pressure rises, you do not shout. You check load paths. You move weight where it belongs. This did not begin in a ballroom. It began in my front entry under winter light when Mason arrived unannounced with a woman whose handshake measured crown molding. Aurora Vale. She wore a dress the color of fog and a smile that stayed put when the eyes shifted. She admired the woodwork. She admired the porch span. She admired the location 5 minutes from the river trail. Then she asked how old the furnace was and whether the title was clear. We sat with coffee. Mason overflowed. He had never been happier. He said those words and I stored them the way you store an anchor point on a plan. The conversation drifted to logistics. She used phrases that I wrote down later because they did not sound like love. Combined household efficiency, family wealth aggregation, succession planning. She said them like bullet points she had practiced. Mason pulled a document from his bag. A prenuptial agreement, 20 pages. Tabs. Her attorney had drafted it. Nothing unusual, she said. Just clarity. The word clarity did a lot of work in that room. I put on my reading glasses like a man buying time and started to read. Clause 7. Family assets acquired during marriage will be considered joint contributions. Family not marital, a curious choice. Clause 12. Inheritances received during marriage transition into joint property after 12 months. If you are not careful, language becomes a gentle hand on your wallet. I asked whether Mason had independent counsel. She answered before he did. Of course, she encouraged it, because that is what transparent people do. I smiled and changed the subject to wedding colors. After they left, I walked to my desk and opened a clean pad. I wrote the words family wealth aggregation and underlined them twice. I am an engineer. Patterns speak louder than promises. A week later in a bistro downtown, I watched Aurora through a stem of water and a pot of basil. Not with my son. With a man in an expensive blazer. Their fingers found each other on the table the way people do when they are not pretending. He paid for lunch without checking the bill. When they stood to leave, her hand lingered at his chest. The photographer in my head started taking pictures. I took a few for real. Plate, time, light. I did not confront her in a restaurant. Confrontations feed stories. Evidence kills them. I hired a private investigator named Harold Boone. Unremarkable face, unremarkable shoes, the kind of man you miss in a crowded elevator. I told him what I wanted. Timelines, contacts, prior marriages if they existed, financial patterns. He named a rate and I wrote a check. You do not haggle with the man you hire to tell you the truth. He delivered the first packet 2 weeks later. Hotel lobbies, bar receipts, the same man from the bistro. His name was Tyler Finch. Luxury real estate, dockside photos that belonged on brochures. Aurora and Tyler met 6 times in 12 days. Long afternoons, doors that closed, patterns. I carried the packet into the office of a family lawyer, Nadia Patel, who keeps a neat bowl of paper clips on her desk and speaks like a metronome. She reminded me of Oregon's one-party consent rules. She reminded me of the Uniform Premarital Agreement Act and how fraud eats paper for breakfast. Intent, she said. You will need intent. You will need a pattern that predates your son. You will need her words. Words. I can work with words. I created a family history document for Mason. Photographs of our old station wagon. Notes about his mother's recipes. And in the middle of a paragraph about my father's pension, I placed a phrase that does not live in the wild. Household capital alignment. No second N. A mistake on purpose. I mailed it to Mason as a PDF and pretended to be sentimental. 2 days later, over pastries in my kitchen, Aurora used my exact misspelling to describe what marriage should achieve. I heard it. I let the recorder in my pocket hear it too. Harold found a previous husband, Leonard Drake, tech services. The man wore quiet clothes and the look of someone who has done the math and cannot unsee it. We met in a cafe in Salem with a window that looked at a bus stop. He told me his story without drama, a fast courtship, thoughtful gestures, a prenup that respected both parties he believed. A father died and left him money 8 months into the marriage. Things changed. Criticism, distance, an affair that arrived like a train you hear before you see. He signed an affidavit in front of a notary. He used a phrase he thought he had made up to cope. Window management. I did not smile. I told him about alignment. The missing letter stayed on the table between us like a fingerprint. Mason began to cancel Sunday dinners, work conflict, photographer meeting, venue walkthrough that ran long, each reason polite. The timeline was not. When he did come, Aurora shaped the conversation toward estate plans and title clarity and whether my house might be too much for me alone. Her tone was warm. Her questions were cold. I kept recording. It is not illegal to remember precisely. The week before the wedding, Harold sent me an audio file captured from a hallway at the downtown Marriott. He labeled it not for court, useful only for knowing the temperature of the fire. Through poor insulation I heard laughter, glass on ice, a door sighing shut. The voices were clear enough. 8 weeks more of this charade. After the vows, the prenup activates. 12 months, 18 for safety. He believes I love him. The old man is isolated. He can suspect whatever he wants. I played that file in the dark and watched the waveform crawl across my screen like a heart that does not belong to me. I thought about the boy who fell asleep in the back seat after baseball practice. I thought about the man in the tux who grinned on a dock and a picture on my fridge. There is a pain a father carries that has no name. You turn it into a list. You turn it into steps. I scouted the venue the morning of the wedding like a job site. Entrances, exits, quiet rooms. The library down the hall had a door that closed with a real latch and a table that could hold a folder without wobbling. I met the DJ and tested the mic. I walked the hallway and counted the cameras. I sat in the back row during the vows and pressed a thumb against the recorder in my jacket. I listened to words about forever and I did not flinch. When the bride leaned in at the reception and told me to go, she thought I would leave small and alone. I nodded because nodding keeps people from seeing the shape of what is coming. I told Mason I needed 10 quiet minutes. I told the room I would not toast. 200 heads turned as if a single neck held them. My son stood. The bride tried to keep him in his chair with a hand on his sleeve. He looked down at that hand, and then he looked at me. 10 minutes, I said. A library down the hall, just you and me. He came. The door closed. The room exhaled behind us. The folder opened. The first tab read Leonard Drake. The second read photographs. The third read prenup. The fourth read voice. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I had built a structure and now I would show him it could stand. The library smelled like old varnish and paper left near a window. A single lamp hummed. The door clicked once and the noise of the reception fell away. Mason stood across from me in his tux, a boy's posture inside a man's suit. He set his jaw the way he used to when he thought he was in trouble. We did not sit. You have 10 minutes, he said. Make them matter. I placed the folder on the table. I did not open with opinions. I opened with a document. Leonard Drake. Notarized. Dates. Addresses. I slid it across the wood and let him hold the weight of it. Who is this? He asked. Her first husband, I said. The one she never told you about. He read the first paragraph. Color bled away from his cheeks and then came back in patches like a tide struggling with the shore. He turned a page. Affection. A fast engagement. A prenup that looked balanced. An inheritance 8 months after the vows. A shift in tone. Criticism. Distance. A real estate man who appeared where a husband should have been. Settlement totals at the bottom. He pressed his knuckle to the number as if a harder press might change it. Anyone could write this, he said. Anyone could lie about her. His voice was careful, like a person testing a bridge that might not hold. I nodded and drew a second set of pages from the folder. The investigation book Harold assembled, photographs printed with dates and times in the corner. I did not explain them. I arranged them left to right. Aurora with Tyler at the bistro, Aurora with Tyler in a hotel lobby, Aurora with Tyler in a reflection on a glass door where her fingers rest at his lapel. The timestamps bracketed your proposal, I said, and also last Tuesday at 4:12 p.m. He lifted one picture and then another. The photo with the hotel's brass numbers in frame, the one with the waterfront condo entry, the one 3 days ago with late afternoon light and her head tilted the way she tilts it for him. He took a breath and let it out through his teeth. He put the photographs down and moved one finger across a date, counting something I could not hear. She could say they were meetings for real estate, he said. She knows people in that field. He sells properties. They talk for work. She can say anything she wants, I said. That is why you do not rely on pictures alone. I turned to the prenup section. Clause 7. I read it out loud, then set the page so he could place his eyes where mine had been. Family assets acquired during marriage will be considered joint contributions. I tapped the word family, not marital. Then the next tab for Clause 12. Inheritance received during marriage transitions into joint property after 12 months. I said nothing for a beat. You remember how she called that transparency? He did not answer. He was looking at the language and not seeing it. So I touched the page with the back of my knuckle and asked him to read the sentences himself. He did. When he finished, he put both palms on the table. I could see the small scar on his right hand from a bicycle chain when he was 10. He looked like he might be sick. You consented to me recording family conversations, I said. You wanted a record of stories. I have those recordings. Not all of them matter. This one does. I pressed the recorder and set it by the lamp. Aurora's voice filled the library in a soft tone like fleece. She talked about estate efficiency. She steered toward title clarity. She shaped the future as a spreadsheet and our last names as columns. I watched his shoulders pull in, and then I saw them lift when he recognized a phrase. Household capital alignment, she said on the recording. He blurted a small laugh that had no humor in it. That is not even a word he said. She misspoke. She did not misspeak, I said. I planted that exact misspelling in a PDF I sent only to you. No one else saw it. I made the error on purpose. There is no second N in what she said. You told her something from my document, and she turned it into a principle. She trusts that all words sound the same. Some do. That one does not. He looked at me and then passed me to the shelves the way a person looks for a door behind the one they just walked through. He rubbed his thumb along the recorder as if he might erase sound by touch. I changed files and played the hallway audio Harold pulled. The quality was thin, but the meaning was heavy. 8 weeks of this charade. After the vows, the prenup activates. 12 months. 18 to be safe. He believes I love him. The old man is isolated. He can suspect whatever he wants. When the laughter on the recording slid under the door and escaped down the hall, he put both hands to his face. 10 seconds, maybe 12. Then he lowered them, and his eyes were wet, but not broken. That is her, he said. That is her voice. Yes, I said. He stared at the table. I could almost hear him sort the pieces. The boy who wanted to be believed, the man who knew what numbers and dates do to wishes. He turned the photos so they faced him like a row of windows, and he looked out each one. He returned to Leonard's statement and put it on top of the pictures, and then he put the prenup on top of that. He was building his own structure. He stared at the stack until whatever needed to align clicked into place. He lifted his head. How do we end this? He asked. How do we end it here? We stand up, I said. You ask the room to listen. You do not explain. You do not accuse. You state what is necessary. You ask guests to leave. You do not look at her more than once. We walk out. I have a bag in the truck with clothes, a toothbrush, and a spare phone. We go home and call counsel. You do not answer her messages. All communication passes through Nadia after tonight. He nodded. He spread his fingers on the table and then closed them. He pushed the pictures back to me. He took the prenup pages and folded them once and slipped them into his inside pocket like a man holstering a tool. He did not touch the recorder. I turned it off. When we opened the door, sound rushed back in as if the building had been holding its breath. The DJ's playlist stumbled and caught itself. Conversations fell to a hush with the ease of people hungry for spectacle. We crossed the carpet toward the head table, and the lights made the glasses shine too bright. Aurora stood relief painting her face until she saw the way Mason's walk had changed. She reached a hand for him and froze when he did not take it. He stepped to the edge of the dance floor. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The room wanted a signal, and he gave it one. "This reception is over," he said. "Thank you for coming. Please go home." There was a scrape of chairs, a few gasps. Someone near the back laughed in the way people laugh when they are not sure what else to do. Aurora tried to claim the moment, words gathering at her teeth, but he lifted a palm to air and the words fell back inside. "We are done here," he said again. He did not use her name. He did not use mine. He looked at the wedding cake and then stopped looking at it as if he understood it could hold his eyes hostage. He moved, and then so did I. We walked the corridor toward the exit. The evening held a thin blue light that turns to silver on polished cars. My truck sat by the curb with a spare jacket on the seat and a duffel behind it. I unlocked the door and Mason stood beside me and did not move to get in. He looked at the lodge and at the knot of people who had followed us as far as the doorway, Aurora among them. Tyler behind them, suddenly careful with his posture as if discretion could grow on him under fluorescent bulbs. She called his name. He did not look. He opened the passenger door and sat down and closed it. He put his head back against the rest and let his breath go. I walked around, slid into the driver's seat, and pulled us away. We did not speak for 5 minutes. The road unwound. Pines moved by like a procession. I kept both hands on the wheel because that is what you do when you carry something fragile. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and steady. "At home," he said. "We call Nadia. Then we sleep." I nodded. In the reflection of the windshield, I could see the folder in the back seat. Tabs bright as little flags. The night felt clean for the first time in weeks. I did not feel victorious. I felt proportion. He was beside me. The structure had held. The house took us in the way an old coat does. Familiar weight. A smell that knows your name. I set the folder on the dining table and turned on the kitchen light. Mason stood with his hands in his pockets and looked at the rooms as if he had not seen them in years. I made coffee because coffee is the thing in my life that still follows instructions. "Call Nadia," he said. I called. She answered on the second ring. I told her we were home and we needed direction tonight, not in the morning. She asked if Mason was with me. I handed him the phone. He listened, said yes twice, and said I understand. When he passed the phone back, his face had the steady look I used to see before he took a hard exam. "Nadia was already driving," she said. 20 minutes. Keep the evidence intact. Do not answer messages. Expect a flood of them." The messages began before I set down the phone. Mason turned his face away from the screen and put the device face down on the table as if it were a small animal he did not want to encourage. We sat without speaking. I watched the steam rise from 2 cups and thought of how many forms steam has taken in my life. Valves, pipes, the line of your own breath on cold glass when you are a boy and want to see your name appear from nothing. Nadia arrived in a dark blazer and flats built for courthouse floors. She took in the room with a quick architect's scan and nodded once at the folder. We sat. She placed a legal pad and an inexpensive pen in front of her and said, "Start at the beginning of this evening and move forward." I spoke. Mason added. She interrupted only to lock time stamps. Then the work began. "Chain of custody first," she said. She slid clear sleeves across the table and made us put photographs and affidavits in their own compartments. She asked for copies of the digital files and handed me a brand new flash drive still in plastic. I made 2 clones from the computer and labeled them by date and time. She watched the progress bar like someone at an airport gate. "One-party consent," she said, tapping the recorder with her pen. "In Oregon, you can lawfully record when you are part of the conversation. These domestic recordings will be admissible. The hallway audio is not for court. It is for strategy. Useful noise, nothing more." She built a timeline on her pad. First sighting of Aurora with Tyler at the bistro. First set of hotel photos. The morning we planted the family history document with the deliberate misspelling. The day Aurora repeated the phrase. The affidavit from Leonard. The wedding day. The library. The announcement. The exit. She turned the pad so Mason could see the progression. This is a pattern, she said. Patterns tell judges that coincidences do not live here. Fraud is a living thing when it shows repetition. Tomorrow, I will file a motion to void the prenuptial agreement and a request for injunctive relief to prevent asset entanglement. You will not communicate with Aurora directly. All contact flows through me. What happens to the marriage? Mason asked. He asked the question without flinching. We can move on annulment grounds in parallel based on fraud, Nadia said. We will talk strategy after the motion hearing. Tonight is about preserving the field. Evidence, safety, sleep. I fetched a small safe I keep in the hall closet and placed it on the table. I put the original photos and the signed affidavit inside. I put the recorder inside. I closed it and felt the little click that announces a thing is now in its box. I saw Mason watch the box with relief, as if he had been holding a heavy basket that someone finally took from his hands. Nadia gave us homework and it came with staples. Sign this engagement letter. Sign this instruction that all communication must go through counsel. She handed Mason a list with 3 lines. Do not answer her messages. Do not meet with her. Do not apologize. The law sometimes travels on clean sentences. She left near midnight. The house regained its quiet. Mason took the guest room. I rinsed the cups, dried them, and set them upside down on a towel because order is a kindness you can give yourself for free. I stood at the window over the sink for a while. The street was a dark ribbon. Somewhere beyond it, the river kept moving. I turned out the light and went to bed with a tiredness that was more than sleep could solve. Morning brought sunlight as if nothing had happened. The phone produced its stack of messages like a printer that refuses to stop. Some were angry. Some were conciliatory. One was performative sorrow written for an audience. Mason did not read them. He forwarded them all to Nadia with a single line per instruction. We ate eggs. We sat with coffee. He said he would like to go to work just to feel his hands on something that obeys a plan. I told him that sounded right. Harold called. He had followed Tyler as far as a waterfront condo and discovered a schedule that explained the rhythm of their meetings. He thought Tyler might fold if served with notice that his messages would be discoverable. Harmless men hold secrets like ice cubes. They melt when they feel heat. I gave Harold Nadia's number. People do their best work when you let them work as a team. By noon, Nadia had filed. She sent a scan of the stamped motion and a court date in a week. She asked me to prepare sworn statements describing the origin of the phrase I had planted and the specific way Aurora had repeated it. She asked if the family history PDF existed on any other devices. It did not. I printed the document and held the paper in my hands and marveled at how a missing letter can one day become an anchor. Mason moved through the day like a man learning to use a different leg. He was steady then unsteady, then steady again. In the afternoon, he sat at the dining table and read Leonard's affidavit alone without the pressure of my presence. I heard the paper move. I heard him stop at a paragraph and then continue. When he finished, he placed the pages in their sleeve and sealed it as if he did not trust his own hands. That evening, a delivery truck brought a box of certified mail forms I had ordered a week earlier when I knew where this would go. Green cards, duplicate receipts. The choreography of proof. I stacked them in a drawer with a pen that always writes. I wrote Aurora's name and her counsel's address on 2 sets and left the rest blank. Mason watched the neatness of it, and I could see the act soothe him. We do not control outcomes. We control the next cleaned surface. Across town, according to Harold Tyler, posted a message on social media about privacy and respect. The language of a man telling a mirror he is good. I did not respond to any of it because responding makes you part of the drama. My job is to be part of the record. 3 days moved like water. The hearing came. A room of wood and echoes. A judge who listens with still hands. Nadia spoke in the language of structure. Pattern. Intent. Timeline. She offered the affidavit. She offered the photos with timestamps. She offered my statement about the planted phrase. She spoke about one-party consent and the admissibility of family recordings. She did not offer the hallway audio, and the restraint made the point for her. We offered only what the law could hold. Aurora sat at the petitioner's table in a suit that wanted to look unassuming and a face that had learned control. Her counsel argued narrative, hurt feelings, a father who meddled, a man who changed his mind after vows, words trying to turn into fog. The judge asked about Clause 7 and Clause 12 and whether the language was standard. The attorney answered yes, and the words sounded weak in the room. The judge set a short continuance for further filings and signaled early impressions with a careful mouth. The record contains credible evidence of misrepresentation and a pattern across relationships, she said. Counsel for the respondent has presented a colorable claim for relief. She ordered a temporary restraining provision preventing any transfer or use of the prenup provisions pending the next hearing. She reminded both sides that this is a court of law, not a public square. We stepped out into hallway light that made everyone look a little human. Nadia spoke in low tones about next steps, discovery, a request for drafts of the prenup from Aurora's counsel, production of electronic communications between Aurora and Tyler. She looked at Mason and said that the sober way he had spoken when asked a question helped. Jurists listen to tone as much as to grammar. I drove us home. We stopped for takeout from a place where the owner recognizes faces and remembers how much chili you like. We ate at the table where the folder had sat the night before. The folder was back in the safe. The table looked normal. Mason finished and put his plate in the sink and stood with his hands braced on the counter and did not move for a long time. I waited. "I thought I loved her," he said. "You did," I said. He looked up at me because that answer surprised him. "Love does not justify a lie," I said. "It only explains your entry. It does not require you to stay." He nodded and his jaw loosened. He exhaled like someone who had been holding breath underwater. He took his phone and opened it and typed a message to his manager saying he would be back at work in the morning. He set the alarm. He took the spare clothes from the duffel and lined them up in the guest room like a man who plans to wake. I washed the 2 plates and left them to dry. I turned off the dining light. In the quiet, the house felt like a structure that had passed inspection. The wind moved through the pines outside and made a low sound like the ocean you visit in your sleep. I thought about how justice does not shout. It accumulates. It builds. It stands. Discovery is not television. It is paper and patience. It is envelopes that arrive with barcodes and a clerk's stamp and the faint smell of toner. The morning after the hearing, I set out the green certified cards and wrote names in steady letters. Counsel for Aurora. Counsel for Tyler, who was now formally a third party with communications that mattered. I placed the forms in a row like tiles and felt a calm I only find around ordered things. Mason left for work with a lunch I packed because the hands remember fathering whether the heart is steady or not. He put his palm on the door jamb the way he used to as a boy and looked back at me for half a second. He did not need words. He needed to move under his own power. I watched him go, and then I called Nadia. She already had a production schedule. We would ask for the prenup drafting history, all versions with tracked changes and metadata. We would ask for communications between Aurora and Tyler for the last 12 months, including the months before Mason met her. We would ask for bank records connected to hotel stays and cash withdrawals around the dates Harold had documented. We would ask for a list of prior settlements under seal if necessary, with amounts and dates redacted for privacy, but present for a judge's eyes. "Serve them all by noon," she said. "Make the chain of custody perfect. If you do not mind a small errand, bring the originals to my office yourself." I liked that instruction because it was an instruction I could execute. I used a black pen that never skips. I sealed what needed sealing and drove downtown with the folder locked in the small safe I had buckled into the back seat like a child. Nadia met me in the conference room with no art on the walls, just an old map of the state and a plant that has survived more winters than my porch fern ever could. We logged each item. We reviewed the language of the requests. We sent a messenger with the packets and watched him step into the elevator with that small irrelevance that still feels like a hinge in the day. Then came the waiting. Waiting has gears if you let it. I fixed a loose cabinet hinge. I swept the garage. I changed the filter in the furnace because Aurora had once asked me its age, and her voice had stuck to the metal. I ate dinner with Mason at the dining table that had seen 100 school projects and 1,000 quiet meals. We spoke about work. We did not speak about the reception. We did not need to. That event had moved into the past, and the future was a docket with a number. On the third day, a courier brought a box I signed for and carried to the dining table. The label said, "Production from Plaintiff." Inside a stack of printed emails from Aurora to counsel with dates and subject lines that tried to sound tidy. A thumb drive sealed in a clear pouch. A letter about what was withheld by privilege. Nadia asked me to wait before opening anything. She arrived within the hour and set down her bag and took a breath and said, "Let us see what language looks like when it thinks it is alone." We plugged in the drive and opened a folder called Agreements. There were 3 versions of the prenup. The first wore a file name with today's happiness in it and a date that predated the proposal by 6 weeks. The second was labeled with a number 2 like a neighbor's mailbox. The third was final underscore signed. I do not like the underscore in life. It hides under what should be read in the open. We opened the first draft. Nadia scrolled with a careful finger. I watched the words move past and stop and move again. There it was. Household capital alignment. The missing letter sat in their draft as if it had lived there all its life. Not a comment bubble, not a track change. Embedded in the sentence that argued for efficiency as a household goal. I did not blink for 3 full breaths. Then I looked at Nadia. "That is our fingerprint," she said. "You planted it in a private document that only Mason received. It appears here in counsel's draft. That is more than carelessness. That is evidence that your bait was harvested and repurposed. It goes to intent. It goes to pattern. It goes to credibility." I felt something in my chest release like a valve that no longer needed to hold back pressure. I thought of the day I typed the mistake with my own fingers and how small it felt at the time. How ridiculous even to imagine a missing letter might one day carry weight in a courtroom. We captured a screenshot with metadata visible and saved it twice to 2 separate drives. We printed a page for the judge's binder. The small printer chattered in the corner and the paper came out warm. I held it by the edges the way you hold a photograph in a museum. The emails were what you would expect from a person building a story while pretending to build a life. Subject lines about caterers blended with notes about beneficiary designations. Phrases that tried to sound like caring but landed like audits. There were questions to counsel about making sure family is protected later and about how to encourage an update to a will without appearing mercenary. Nadia flagged those. Judges do not like the word mercenary even when it is wrapped in caution. It smells like motive. We waited on Tyler's production. That would come through his counsel after a small dance of reluctance and compulsion. In the meantime, Harold called to say he had obtained photos of Tyler and Aurora at a jeweler months before Mason bought the ring he thought was the first. The date stamps were aggressive in their clarity. I thanked Harold and told him that sometimes clarity is not a virtue in people, but it is always a virtue on a page. Mason arrived home late that night with pizza and a pair of tired eyes. I showed him the printout of the draft language. He read the sentence and tapped the missing letter with his forefinger. "She took it from you," he said. "From our document. She took it and called it a principle." "Yes," I said. He sat down on the step between the kitchen and the hall with the slice open in his hand and did not take a bite. Then he smiled in a way that did not gloat. It simply acknowledged gravity. He ate, and we let the printout rest on the table where the lamplight made the ink look like it had been there forever. The next day, Nadia texted that Tyler's counsel had agreed to an expedited search of his phone in exchange for limited scope. We would get messages to and from Aurora for the relevant period. We would not get anything beyond. That was fine. Enough is not all she wrote. It is better. When the second production arrived, it was digital only, a spreadsheet with date, time, sender, receiver, and content, plus a folder of images pulled from the phone. I opened the spreadsheet and felt the old comfort of rows and columns, numbers that behave, words shaped into cells. We filtered by phrases that mattered. The first 2 filters gave us ordinary gossip and nothing that worked in a courtroom. The third was the phrase with the missing letter. There it was. Household capital alignment in a message from Aurora to Tyler with a winking face that tried to turn cynicism into flirtation. She used it like a joke. He answered with a quick yes and a note about how long he thought she would need to play devoted. 18, he wrote. She said 12, then a cushion. The language matched the hallway audio in tenor, if not exact syllable. It was enough. We added the screenshots to the binder. We printed the row from the spreadsheet with the filter visible, then cleared the filter and printed the whole page again. Lawyers love context when it helps and fear it when it harms. Ours helped. Under the messages was a photo Tyler had texted her from a condo balcony. The city lights underneath. a fist in the frame holding up a key like a promise he should not have made. I enlarged the image and saw the outline of her phone case reflected in the glass. It had a small scratch shaped like a comma near the camera ring. In one of Harold's hotel photos, I found the same scratch reflecting a lobby chandelier. The world keeps its own chain of custody if you are patient. We met Nadia again to assemble the updated binder. She moved through the materials with care. The affidavit, the photos, the draft with the missing letter, the messages that mirrored the hallway audio in psyche if not in sound. She paused on the printout of the draft sentence and traced the air above it with her pen without touching the paper. "This is the hinge," she said, a phrase that could not be there without theft. A theft that happens in language is still a theft. It is also a map. It points from your private file to their public intent. Judges notice when maps line up. On the way home, Mason asked if I felt angry now that the pieces drew such a clear shape. I told him the truth. I felt relief. Anger is a solvent. It removes bonds quickly and can leave you with nothing to hold on to. Relief is a mortar. It sets and allows weight. I wanted a structure that could carry both of us without groaning. That evening we walked the neighborhood in the long light and did not talk about filings. We talked about an old neighbor who painted his mailbox every spring. We talked about a restaurant that used to serve a cherry pie so sweet your teeth hummed. We came home and I saw the stack of green cards on the counter and I lifted one and felt the small ridge of the perforation. Proof can be beautiful when it means you can finally sleep. The next hearing would come soon. Nadia would make the argument. Opposing counsel would try to make fog out of a missing letter. The judge would decide whether a typo can carry moral weight. I already knew the answer. A mistake becomes a compass when it points to the only place it could have come from. I set the binder in the safe and closed the door and listened to the click. It sounded like a lock. It also sounded like a beginning. The week slid forward on rails I could finally see. Nadia sent a short message the night before depositions. "Sleep if you can. Bring only what we agreed. Speak only to questions. Answer in plain sentences." I turned off the kitchen light and stood at the window a minute longer than necessary, watching my reflection go soft against the dark. In the glass, I looked like a man who has decided to carry his age like a tool instead of a wound. Morning put us in a conference room with a carafe of water and chairs that try to look expensive. Mason sat to my left, Nadia to my right. Across the table, a court reporter arranged a small machine like a compact instrument she knew better than her own heartbeat. Aurora arrived with her attorney and a palette that asked the room to believe she had slept well. Tyler came 10 minutes later, careful with his eyes. He looked at the ceiling, at his watch, at a painting of a mountain that was not our mountain. He did not look at Mason. Nadia set a small stack of labeled binders in front of her as if she were setting down bricks. She greeted everyone the way people used to greet one another before the age of apology and performance. "Good morning. Shall we begin?" She started with Tyler. His counsel did what counsel does, objected to form with a gentle rhythm even when the form was clean. Nadia asked about dates and restaurants and rooms with numbers on their doors. Tyler answered like a man who meant to be helpful to himself. He confirmed dinner in March that bled into a late check-in. He confirmed a midweek lunch with a bottle of wine that could buy a decent set of tires. He confirmed a pattern without ever saying the word pattern. Nadia slid a single page across the table. It was the screenshot of the message where Aurora typed the phrase with the missing letter, household capital alignment. She read it into the record slowly so there would be no mistake. Tyler nodded too quickly. "Was this message sent by you or to you?" she asked. "To me," he said. "What did the phrase mean to you?" she asked. He stared at the page as if it might shift if he waited. He said it was a joke, a thing lovers say when they do not want to say money. He used the word lovers, and the reporter did not pause. Nadia let the quiet hold. Then she asked how long he expected Aurora to act like a wife before filing. He said he would need to review. Nadia put the printed row of the spreadsheet in front of him where his own words lived. 18. He did not claim a misprint. He did not ask for time. He said yes. When it was Aurora's turn, the room's air pulled tight. Nadia did not argue with her eyes or her mouth. She asked about first meetings. She asked about the prenup timeline. She asked when the first draft had been created. Aurora said after the proposal. Nadia opened her binder and slid the file list from the thumb drive toward the reporter so she could type the creation date. 6 weeks before. Nadia did not look at Aurora when she asked the next question. She looked at the ceiling light as if reading something there. Please explain to the record the appearance of the phrase, household capital alignment in your counsel's draft, she said. Aurora blinked as if dust had landed on her lashes. She said it was a typo. She said typos happen. Nadia agreed. Typos do happen. But this typo happens to match an error planted in a private family document sent only to Mason. When did you first see that family history file? Aurora said she could not recall. She said it was possible Mason had read parts of it to her while they discussed the future. Nadia let the reporter catch up. Then she asked if Aurora considered it transparent to adapt private family language into a contract term designed to convert inheritance into joint property. Aurora said she was not a lawyer. Nadia gave a small nod that meant she did not need the answer, only the way it sat on the page. Mason was deposed last. He spoke like a man building a small bridge one board at a time. He did not shade. He did not speculate. He acknowledged what he had believed and then described what he had learned. When opposing counsel tried to draw him into a fight about where a father belongs in a grown man's marriage, Mason chose a sentence I had heard Nadia practice with him at the dining table. I believed I was in an honest relationship. Evidence proved otherwise. The court reporter's fingers paused for a heartbeat and then moved. By afternoon, the green certified cards had begun to return to my mailbox with signatures that make everything real. I laid them in a line on the hall table. The line made a shape that settled me. Proof can be a quiet thing that sits where your keys used to go. The second hearing came quicker than I expected and slower than I wanted. Courthouses always smell faintly of dust and pledge. The judge looked like a person you would trust to hold a secret you did not yet understand. Nadia opened with the phrase. She did not turn it into a clever story. She did not raise her voice. She placed it in context and let it do its math. She walked through the dates. She walked through the messages. She walked through the affidavit from Leonard and the photographs, and the fact that the first prenup draft predates any proposal by weeks. Opposing counsel tried to argue that we had constructed meaning out of a single missing letter. The judge interrupted in a way that felt kind. Counsel, the issue is not the letter itself. It is the provenance. It is where the phrase originated and how it traveled. It is also the totality of the pattern. Please address that. Aurora sat very straight. Tyler looked at the floor. When it was my turn to testify, I told the truth in square sentences. I said I had sent a family history file to my son. I said I had deliberately embedded a phrase that did not exist outside that file. I said I had done so to determine whether language was being lifted and recycled. I said I had spent my life as an engineer looking for points of failure, and that words can be beams when people try to walk across obligations. I did not look at Aurora. I looked at the judge and at the pen in her hand, and I answered the questions. The judge did something I did not expect. She took a long pause and then asked me what I had planned to do if I had been wrong, if the phrase had never reappeared. I told her I would have stored the file, gone to the wedding, and tried to like the cake. She wrote something on her pad and nodded once. Rulings do not land like gongs. They arrive the way evening arrives on a good porch. You feel the air change, and then you realize your skin is cooler. The judge found that the prenuptial agreement was procured by misrepresentation, and that the pattern of conduct supported the inference of fraudulent intent. She voided enforcement. She dismissed Aurora's civil claim for damages with prejudice. She referred the matter to the district attorney to review for possible criminal violations related to financial fraud across relationships. She set a schedule for the annulment petition and told counsel to confer about simplifying what was left to fight about. We stepped into the hall where someone had hung a painting of a river that was not our river. Mason stood with his hands in his pockets and did not move for a full half-minute. When he did, he put his hand on my shoulder and left it there. Nadia shook his hand and then mine and told us to go home and leave the next filings to her. Her mouth softened the way it does when a case moves from fight to repair. At home, I made dinner because hunger does not respect calendars. Mason ate and then called Leonard to thank him. He kept the call brief because gratitude is better when it fits in a hand. He texted a friend he had not spoken to in months and asked if he wanted to fish next weekend. He set his phone face down again when messages from numbers he did not recognize arrived with opinions he had not asked for. Late that night, I pulled a small shadow box out of a closet. It had belonged to my wife and once held seashells from a trip we took when Mason was small. I cleaned the glass and set the box on the hall table. Inside, I placed a photocopy of the case number, a small key from the library at the lodge that the manager had mailed back after I called and explained I had carried it out in a hurry, and a yellow sticky, with a sentence I wrote in block letters. Trust, then verify. I closed the box and hung it by the light switch where a hand might pause and remember. Sleep came easier than it had in months. In the morning I heard birds before I heard my own thoughts, and the sound felt like a kind of permission. Mason left for work with a lighter step. He did not look back at the door, not because he did not need me, but because he knew I would be there when he returned. The house held the quiet like a blessing, and in that quiet I felt something new take root. Not triumph, a rightness that does not require applause. Harold called to say Tyler had posted a careful statement online trying to explain himself to strangers. Nadia sent a line saying, "Do not read it. Let the process finish." I brewed coffee and watched steam rise in the kitchen light. The cup warmed my palms. I thought about how long it takes to build a bridge people can trust, and how fast a single weak beam can make them afraid to cross. Then I looked at the shadow box and the little key inside, and I understood that sometimes a door closes with a soft click, and that sound is the sound of a life turning back toward itself. The first Saturday after the ruling, I woke before the alarm and listened to the house breathe. A sparrow practiced the same 3 notes outside the kitchen window. I made oatmeal the way Mason liked it when he was 10 and set 2 bowls on the table. He came down in a clean shirt and looked less like a man surviving an accident and more like himself. He took a spoonful, nodded once, and ate without talking. Hunger is honest when everything else is complicated. Nadia called at 9. Her voice carried paper in it. The district attorney's office had opened a file and assigned an investigator. They wanted voluntary statements and a clean copy set of our exhibits. She also had a draft of the annulment stipulation ready if we wanted to offer a narrow path for ending what remained on the civil docket. Her advice was simple. Boundaries now, no improvisation. She sent over a letter for Mason to sign. All communication with Aurora must go through counsel. No visits, no calls, no messages. No. We printed 2 copies on heavy paper and Mason signed both. I walked to the post office with the certified envelopes and stood in a short line that smelled like tape and dust. The clerk stamped the green cards and slid them back with a practiced motion that I have always liked. It means a message did not just leave your hands. It arrived somewhere. Harold called in the afternoon. Tyler's counsel had requested a meeting. Tyler was reconsidering his position. He did not want to be the last person holding evidence that was going to surface anyway. Harold thought he would cooperate if he could do it quietly and on a schedule that made him look like a citizen rather than a co-author. I passed the call to Nadia. Some doors open better when a lawyer knocks. We did not talk about any of it at dinner. We grilled on the back porch and watched the pine tips darken against a long sky. Mason told me about a problem at work with a supplier who never answered emails and how he had solved it with a 5-minute phone call and a handwritten note. The older I get, he said, the more I believe in paper. We both smiled at that. Inside the shadow box near the light switch caught the last light and made the small key look like a piece of jewelry. 2 days later, the DA investigator sat at our dining table with a pad and a pen and listened better than most people I have known. She asked for the story twice. The first time was for the narrative. The second time was for the track. Dates, times, places. The shape of a plan seen from above. She did not flinch at the planted phrase. She called it language provenance and asked me to describe exactly how I typed it, where I saved it, and who received it. She photographed the page with the typo in Aurora's counsel's draft and the matching text from Tyler's phone. She did not smile or frown. She just wrote the word verified in small neat letters next to a box on her form. When she left, Mason followed her onto the porch and stood there a moment before he came back inside. He held himself straight, but his hands flexed as if something had passed through them that he could not name. I asked if he was all right. He said yes. He said telling it twice made the story feel like it belonged to the record and not to his chest. That seemed right to me. I have always trusted ledgers more than dreams. That week, Aurora tried to call 3 times. She sent 2 emails with subject lines that sounded like apologies but opened like threats. Mason did not answer. He forwarded everything to Nadia. Nadia sent a short note to opposing counsel, reminding them of the court's order and of our letter. She used one sentence that I liked so much I wrote it on a scrap and kept it on the fridge. Silence is our position. Do not mistake it for retreat. On Thursday evening, someone knocked at the front door with the polite insistence of a courier. I opened it to find a man I did not know holding a florist's box and a narrow card. For the bride, he said, as if reading a script he had been handed. I told him the bride did not live here. He looked at the address again and frowned at the paper in his hand. I took the card without taking the flowers. Inside, in a loopy hand, were words about second chances and a plan to talk outside lawyers. I put the card back in the envelope, sealed it with a small press of my finger, and handed both back to the man. "Wrong house," I said. He nodded, relieved to be free of a task no one should make him do. I called Nadia to report the attempt. She said to log it, which I did in a notebook on the shelf by the phone. Time, date, description. I have never kept a diary. I am keeping one now, and it reads like a checklist. It steadies me. On Saturday morning, Mason came into the kitchen with a simple sentence I did not expect and welcomed like rain. "I want to talk to someone," he said. "Not a friend, a professional." Nadia had given us 3 names. We chose the counselor whose office sat above a bakery because the hallway smelled like cinnamon. Mason went alone. He came back with a paper in his hand and a sentence on his face that did not require words. He left the paper on the table. It was an appointment schedule and a 1-page sheet about manipulation tactics, isolation, love bombing, financial reframe. He did not need to read it to me. I had seen every section play out in real time. The next week we met Nadia in her office to sign the annulment stipulation. The language was dry and kind and exact. It ended what needed ending without conferring anything that was not earned. As we were leaving, Nadia's assistant handed us a thin envelope from Tyler's counsel. Inside were screenshots of messages for the period the court had authorized. There were the lines we had already seen. There was more. Notes about Watch, the old man, he keeps records. A complaint about how long it took for a certain clause to be accepted by Mason without a fight. A photograph of a dress with a price tag that could make a mortgage nervous, captioned with a joke about getting it before the window closes. We added the pages to the binder and felt the binder do what binders do when they are full of what judges need. They get heavy in your hands. The DA investigator called to say Aurora's counsel had asked about a plea to a lesser charge that would include restitution to prior victims and probation with strict terms. She asked for our input. I said I believe in proportion. I do not need a cell for her. I need a record that protects the next man and return of money where return is due. Mason agreed. He did not sound merciful. He sounded clean. That evening we ate at a diner that keeps its coffee strong and its pie honest. We sat in a booth and shared a slice that tasted both too sweet and exactly right. The waitress called me Han without meaning anything by it and filled our cups in a rhythm I found comforting. On the way home, Mason asked what I would have done if there had been no draft with the missing letter, no phone messages, no previous husband willing to sign. I told him I would have used what I had, the pictures, the tone, the feeling a decent man gets when a conversation is not honest, but I would have moved slower. I would have watched longer. He nodded and seemed to file the answer where he keeps the parts of my life he is willing to inherit. I slept and woke in the dark to rain beginning on the roof. The sound moved across the shingles like hands smoothing a wrinkled shirt. In the morning, the neighborhood smelled washed. I made coffee and stood by the window. The binder sat on the dining table. The safe sat in the hall. The shadow box caught a square of weak sun. I felt the quiet enter me like air after a long swim. Harold sent a last update. Tyler had given a brief statement that echoed what we already knew and confirmed one detail I had wondered about. It was Aurora who insisted on the 1-year trigger for inheritance. Not her counsel, not a template. Her. He had the text where she made the request. It read like a shopping list. We printed it and tucked it into the back of the binder under a tab labeled Notes so we would not forget that choices were made by people, not papers. At noon, Mason came home from work early, set his keys in the bowl by the door, and said he was going to the river. He asked if I wanted to walk with him. We went without talking for a long stretch. The Deschutes moved in its old bed beside us, unconcerned with our calendars. Mason picked up a flat stone and skimmed it 3 times and watched the ripples vanish into current. He told me the counselor had given him a sentence to practice when his mind tried to rewrite what had happened. She deceived me is not a failing. Staying would have been. He said it twice quietly like a man sharpening a tool. When we reached the small footbridge, we stopped. The boards under our feet held. The water said its piece and kept going. I thought about the first time I took Mason to this spot when he was little and fell in love with a dragonfly. He had run along the handrail with his arms outstretched and told me to watch, always watch. I did then, and I do now. I watched him stand with his eyes on the river until he was finished with it. Then we walked home, not because everything had been solved, but because the path ran back to the house we could finally rest in. The week after our walk along the river, life began to fit back into its old joints. Not perfectly. Just enough that the doors closed without force. I woke early and brewed coffee the way my hands have memorized, counted each scoop, leveled it with the back of a spoon. The kitchen window held a square of morning, and for a moment I let myself stand in it. Steam lifted, quiet and sure. Nadia called just after 8. The district attorney was ready to discuss terms. A conference room at the courthouse, no theatrics, only paper. "Bring the binder," she said, "and bring nothing you don't need." Mason stood in the doorway while I listened. He had his jacket over his arm and that new steadiness in his face that I was starting to trust. I hung up and told him the time. He nodded once and went to get the folder from the safe. The click of the lock carried down the hall like a posture. The DA sat at one end of a long table with an investigator to her right. Across from us, Aurora and her attorney. Tyler and his counsel took chairs at the far end as if distance might dilute proximity. The DA spoke without tilt or heat. Proposed plea to a lesser count under the fraud statute. 3 years probation, restitution paid into a victim's fund with disbursements to identified parties upon verification. A no-contact order with Mason and a clause that barred attempts to enforce the prenuptial agreement now or later. Mandatory financial counseling not as kindness but as condition. Violation would collapse the arrangement and send everything back to the start. She asked if we wanted to be heard. I said proportion matters. The record should protect the next man more than it punishes this one. Mason said he agreed. His voice did not shake. He didn't look at her. The DA wrote 2 short notes and set her pen down as if that settled gravity. Aurora's attorney requested language narrowing public access to the case file. The DA shook her head. Names could be left off minor documents, but the plea and the restitution schedule would be open to inspection. "This is not a confessional," she said. "It is a ledger. Ledgers are for the public." There was a moment where Aurora might have said something. Her mouth moved and then closed. I watched Tyler adjust his cuff like he was trying to pull back time with his fingers. We signed what we needed to sign. The room didn't change. Paper changes rooms slowly the way shade moves across a yard. On the way home, Mason asked what restitution looks like, as if it might arrive in envelopes with apologies written on the flap. I told him it arrives as checks or credits tracked on a spreadsheet logged under a case number. Some will go to people we'll never meet. That is the point. Repair is not about the person who caused the harm seeing your face again. It is about weight moved back toward center. The next day, the country club manager called a man whose voice learned courtesy before it learned electricity. He apologized for the disturbance at our event. He asked about the remaining invoice. I told him we would pay what was owed for the service rendered minus what they had waived. I asked for a final statement. He emailed it within the hour. Mason and I sat at the dining table and went line by line, flowers, seating, a DJ who kept his schedule. I wrote a check and scanned it, then drove it across town myself. When I handed it to the manager, he looked relieved and a little ashamed. "No need for that," I told him. "You ran a room. The room did what rooms do." He folded the check into a drawer and thanked me as if we had saved him from a story he did not want to tell his wife. Back at home, the mailbox offered its own slow parade. A green card signed by opposing counsel acknowledging our last letter. A notice from the court with the annulment hearing date. A plain envelope from the DA with a form to confirm where restitution should land. I filled it out in block letters and pressed the edges until the glue held. The sound the flap made felt like a small completion. Mason kept his appointment with the counselor over the bakery. He came back smelling like cinnamon and rain. He set a worksheet on the table and we didn't talk about it. We didn't have to. Later he took a box from the hall closet and laid his tux inside, then closed the lid as if sealing a season. He placed it on the top shelf without ceremony. The last time he'd stood on that stool was to reach toy trains. This time his hands were steady. Nadia asked us to draft impact statements for the court's file. Not to read out loud. To be kept in the record. Mason sat at the dining table with a pen and paper. He didn't open a laptop. He wrote in his own hand, slow as if each word had a weight limit. I brewed tea and left it within reach. He finished after an hour and slid the page toward me. He wasn't asking me to read it. He was asking me to witness its existence. I nodded and slid it back. He put it in an envelope, sealed it, and wrote the case number with care. He placed it in the binder under a new tab. Repair. 2 evenings later, Harold called with a detail I didn't need but still appreciated. Tyler had provided one last text string, a short one where Aurora weighed whether she could salvage anything by turning Mason against me after the wedding. It read like a script for a play no one should perform. The old man is overprotective. He can be made to look jealous. The plan assumed a glare where there had been patience, a shout where there had been a folder. I thanked Harold and told him to send it to Nadia. He made a pleased sound, the noise of a man who has found the missing screw at the bottom of the drawer. On Friday, we changed the porch light. The old one had begun to flicker under rain. Mason held the new fixture while I handled wires and screws, a familiar choreography from the years when I taught him the names of tools and what not to touch. We were quiet except for the small words work requires. Hand me that. Hold here. Don't let it slip. When we finished, the new lens sat clean against the siding and the bulb inside held steady. We stood on the walk and looked at our work the way men do when they have chosen not to say anything sentimental. The light did that work for us. The annulment hearing arrived dressed in wood and patience. The judge read the stipulation in a voice that could have been a bell if bells wore robes. She asked Mason to confirm he understood the terms. He said he did. She asked if he entered into the marriage under misrepresentation. He answered yes once without fray. She asked me if there was anything I wished to add. I said only that some structures show their true load when you stop pretending. She wrote a note I could not read and nodded. Petition granted. She said it in a way that felt like a door opening into a house you already own. We walked out into air that tasted like pine and new paint. Nadia shook our hands and told us to go do something ordinary. For the record, she said, and maybe for your lives. So we went to the hardware store and bought a bag of grass seed and a small trowel with a wooden handle that fit my palm. At home, we patched the bare spots by the walkway. Mason pressed soil with the back of the rake. I scattered seed the way I had watched my father scatter seed, with a simple flick of the wrist and faith in water. That evening, a letter came addressed to Mason from Leonard. He had received his restitution notice. He wrote 3 short lines. It will not give me back time. It does tell the truth about what took it. Thank you for stopping the next part of the pattern. Mason read it twice and set it on the shelf by the door where people keep items they want to see on their way out. As the house settled, I found myself putting small things in order. I polished the banister Aurora had once admired with the kind of attention that is its own prayer. I oiled the hinge on the hall closet. I replaced a drawer slide that had been making a sound like regret. None of it changed the case file. All of it changed the air in rooms that had held too much watching and not enough breathing. Late that night, after Mason had gone to bed, I stood in the hallway and looked at the shadow box by the light switch. The little key sat next to the case number. The card inside bore the sentence I'd written weeks earlier: trust, then verify. I touched the frame with one finger and felt the glass cool under my skin. I switched off the hall light. The click sounded crisp. Through the open window somewhere beyond the pines, a bird drew a line across the dark with 3 notes and then rested. It felt like a benediction given by something that did not care who deserved it. In the morning, I woke to find Mason at the table with a map of the Cascades unfolded, tracing a route with a pencil. He looked up and asked if I wanted to see a lake he thought I'd like. I said yes. He folded the map, slid it into his jacket, and opened the door. The new porch light waited to be needed steady in its bracket. We stepped outside and the air came clean into our lungs. The street was quiet. The day held. We locked the door and the sound it made was small and complete. We drove out before the sun took possession of the sky. The road shouldered up into the Cascades and the pines gathered like old friends trading weather. Mason hummed along to a station that never quite came in, then turned it off and let the quiet sit between us. We reached a pullout that looked like a thought someone had once had, and then left for us to find. The trail down to the lake was a ribbon of dust and roots. We walked it without talking. The water held a stillness that makes you believe in measurement. A loon called once and then changed its mind. Mason stood at the edge and let a small stone go. It plinked and disappeared. He put his hands on his hips the way he used to before he tried something that might hurt. I keep replaying the library, he said. the folder, the way the words stacked until they could not fall. We let the idea hang between us and then settle. I told him I sometimes replay the first time I saw his mother at a job site when the wind kept stealing her hair tie. Memory is a tool if you hold it right. It can also be a blade. He nodded. The counselor says I need a sentence I can live with, not a theory, a sentence I can say out loud. He looked at the water. She deceived me. Leaving is not failure. He did not ask for approval, and I did not give it. I simply stood beside him until the sentence belonged to him. On the drive back, my phone buzzed with a message from Nadia. The judge had accepted the plea that morning in a brief hearing we had chosen not to attend. Restitution would be administered through the fund by quarter starting next month. Terms included no contact mandatory counseling and a prohibition against initiating any civil action tied to the voided prenup. The file was public. She wrote it simply. This phase is complete. We stopped for gas in a town with a diner shaped like a memory. Inside, the waitress called everyone Han and meant it the way a person says good morning to the same mountain every day. Mason ordered pancakes like he was 12 and finished all of them without apology. The owner had a jar on the counter for local scholarships. It was a coffee can with a label that had been peeled off another life. The slot cut in the lid looked handmade. I stood there too long and then folded a bill and dropped it in. When we left, the bell above the door made a sound that stays in a person longer than they expect. Back home, a thick envelope waited in the mailbox. A formal notice from the fund with routing details and an accounting table that would have pleased any engineer. Columns for amounts, columns for dates, a narrative line for each disbursement. Names were redacted, but the case numbers told a quiet story. I sat at the dining table and read each line and felt the unglamorous mercy of paper that takes the long view. Mason came in from the garage with an old tackle box in his hand and set it on the counter. He popped the latches and looked at the tray the way archaeologists must feel when they lift a lid. Handwritten labels, hooks in small envelopes, a cork bobber with a bite in it, teeth marks from a boy who liked to test everything. He smiled. I thought I had lost this, he said. In the afternoon, Nadia stopped by to have us sign a final set of documents for the annulment file. She did not linger. She stood in the entry and said she was glad we had resisted theater. Most people do not understand that a courtroom is not a stage. She looked at Mason. The way you held your sentences helped. Then she looked at me and said something I had not expected to matter. The bait you planted was precise, but what made it stand was your stillness. Predators mistake stillness for weakness. Judges do not. After she left, I took the folder from the safe one more time and laid the contents out in the late light the way a carpenter lays out tools after a job to make sure nothing is missing. Affidavit, photos, draft language with the missing letter, messages that confirmed tone even when they did not confess intent. I slid each piece back into its sleeve and returned the binder to the safe. I did not feel like a man who had won. I felt like a man who had closed a gate before the animals got out. The next morning, a letter arrived from Leonard, not about money, about time. He wrote that he had taken a day off to sit in a park he had avoided since his divorce because he could finally sit there without feeling leveled by a memory. He wrote that repair does not give you back old hours. It gives you different ones. He thanked Mason for listening and me for showing my work. The phrase made me smile. Engineers like to be understood even when there is nothing left to build. In the afternoon, I drove to the community college on the other side of town and sat with a woman in a small office lined with brochures. I told her I wanted to start a modest scholarship in my wife's name for students in building inspection or civil drafting. Nothing loud. 2 students a year, funds administered by the school. She asked where the money would come from. I told her from a restitution line in a ledger and from what I could add without making a speech about it. She wrote notes and then looked up with a kindness that did not feel borrowed. We can do that, she said. We will do that. On the way home, I passed the country club without meaning to and saw the manicured slopes like a photograph of a place I had never visited. A delivery truck idled by the service entrance. The awning over the main door rippled a little as if the building had decided to breathe on its own. I did not turn in. I tapped the wheel twice and drove on. Harold called that evening with what he called a last bit of pattern for the file. He had found a small thread in an older county record that suggested Aurora had once tested a similar phrase in a previous situation long before she met Mason. Not the same words, the same posture. He said the DA had appreciated the context and filed it away. He said he was done unless we needed him, and then asked about fishing in a tone that had nothing to do with work. I told him the river was low but honest. He laughed a short sound like agreement. Mason and I ate on the back steps. The light stretched the way July light does when it tries to get in a few extra words. He told me he had spoken to a friend he had avoided from embarrassment. The friend had not wanted an apology. He had wanted to know when Mason could meet for coffee. Shame rehearses conversations that other people do not want to have, he said. Maybe this year I learned not to rehearse for the wrong audience. After dishes, I pulled a small wooden frame from a drawer. Inside it was a faded photograph of Mason at 8 years old with a new baseball glove, his smile too big for his face. I set the frame on the mantel next to a picture of him with a cap and gown that had sat there so long it had learned to be part of the house. Aurora had once stood in this room and called my collection of family photos clutter. She had said minimalism shows maturity. I stood in the same place and decided that memory is not clutter if it holds you up when you need it. We turned in early. Before sleep took me, I listened for the small sounds that tell you a house is content. The tick of cooling metal in the oven. The whisper of air through a vent. A branch touching a gutter and then changing its mind. The door to the guest room clicked with the courtesy of a son closing a door without waking his father. Morning came with the sound of a trash truck and a jay conducting its usual argument with the fence. I made coffee. Mason came into the kitchen with a jacket already on and said he felt like a long drive south to a town with a bookstore that smells like paper. He asked if I wanted to come. I told him yes, because there is no case left to build, and sometimes the right thing to do with a day is to put miles under it. On the way out, we passed the shadow box by the light switch. He tapped the glass with a knuckle. "Trust, then verify," he said, as if tasting the words again. He smiled and stepped through the doorway. The porch light above us held steady. The lock gave its small, clean sound, and I felt it in my chest the way a builder feels it when the last screw bites and the frame stops moving. We walked to the truck. The day still had its own mind. We took it anyway. The road south gave us the bookstore Mason promised, a narrow place with slanted floors and an owner who shelved by instinct. We split up without a plan and found each other again 10 minutes later in front of a rack of field guides. He held one on birds of the high desert and said nothing. I nodded. We bought 2 paperbacks and a used map with someone else's pencil marks in the margins. I have always liked maps that know they have been handled. Back home, the mailbox held a letter from the district attorney. Terms had been entered. Restitution disbursements would begin next month. There was a paragraph about compliance review and a number to call if anything felt off. The number mattered. The paragraph that followed mattered more. 2 individuals had reached out after reading the public filing, both describing early contact with Aurora that echoed familiar patterns. They were not yet victims. They would not become them. The letter did not say thank you. It did not need to. Mason put the bird guide on the kitchen counter and thumbed through the pages as if he had always owned it. He stopped on a photo of a red tail and held it up for me. "This one," he said. "The way it waits. The way it moves when it needs to." In the days that followed, life reduced itself to practical shapes. Work, meals, a walk when the light ran long. On Wednesday evening, the country club manager sent a final receipt and a short note. He wrote that staff still talked about the night the room went quiet, and that some of them had learned something about grace under a floodlight they did not ask to stand in. He hoped our family was well. I replied with a sentence that would read well out loud. "We are mending what needed mending." Nadia called with a different sort of task. The court invited written statements for the probation file. Not heat, not blame, just clarity. What had this cost? What had it almost cost? I sat at the dining table with a pen and wrote that time is currency and that years late in life are not interchangeable with years early. I wrote that a father's job does not end when his son leaves home, and that sometimes the work looks like paperwork and silence and a steady hand on a door. I kept it to 1 page because 1 page reads like a decision. Mason wrote his own statement upstairs with the window open. I heard the pen stop and start the sound of a person choosing words without letting them choose him. When he came down, he did not hand it to me. He sealed it and wrote a case number and left it by the shadow box where the hall light can find it. That is one way of saying this belongs to the record, not to our kitchen. Harold called with a tidy update. Tyler had provided a full timeline of meetings and a short recorded statement that matched his messages and put his part in plain view. The DA would not charge him. Cooperation can be a kind of penance if it arrives in time. Harold sounded almost relieved to be wrapping his file. He asked about fishing again, and I told him the river had been good to us. He laughed and said he might try being good back. On Friday, a plain envelope arrived for me with handwriting I did not recognize. Inside was a copy of a check stub with my name blacked out and a note that simply said, "I got my life back when you refused a toast." No signature. The bank stamp and the case number gave it weight. I set it under the magnet on the fridge, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that choices leave echoes in rooms you will never enter. That weekend, Mason and I replaced the weather stripping on the back door. We pulled the brittle foam free and pressed new material into the groove. The quiet it brought when we closed the door felt larger than it should have. Little repairs like that are sermons that do not require a congregation. He stood back and listened to the door find its seat. "Better," he said. I agreed. On Sunday evening, a number we did not know left a long message on the house line. A man spoke the way people do when they have decided to reach out without asking for anything. He said he had been dating a woman who took a sudden intense interest in his mother's house and in his retirement accounts. He said he had read every line of our case file. He said he had walked away. He did not say her name, and I did not need him to. He said thank you at the end like a man setting down a heavy thing. I saved the message and wrote the time in the notebook by the phone. Date, caller ID, summary, habit learns your hands and stays there. Mason went to see his counselor in the office above the bakery. When he returned, he carried a paper sack that smelled like sugar and said the session had been different. Less explaining, more building. He said the counselor had asked him to list small rituals he wanted back. Sunday dinners without negotiation, a monthly hike, working on something in the house that would let him go to bed tired for the right reasons. He read the list out loud and then tore it from the pad and stuck it to the fridge with the magnet next to the note from the stranger. 2 lists together, different ink, same direction. Nadia sent word that the annulment was officially recorded. She forwarded a digital notice that looked like every other scanned document in the world and still felt like a clean window. She suggested we update beneficiary designations, passwords, and points of contact that had been shared during the courtship, not to indulge fear, to close loops. Mason handled his list while I handled mine. It is amazing how much housekeeping lives in the wires. One afternoon, I drove out to visit the small scholarship office at the community college to finalize what we had discussed. The coordinator printed a simple form, and I wrote my wife's name on a line that had never held it. We chose criteria that would give students with steady hands and quiet determination a hand up. I wrote the first check and felt nothing grand, only a rightness I had not felt in months. The coordinator shook my hand and said, "We will send you the names of the first recipients this fall." I said I would like to meet them if they wanted that. She said, of course, but warned me not to expect speeches. I said I preferred it that way. On my way back, I stopped at a hardware store and bought a small brass plate with 2 screw holes, the sort of thing you buy when you intend to make a mark without making a fuss. At home, I mounted it under the shadow box in the hall. I asked Mason to read it. He did, and then smiled as if the words had been obvious all along. We wrote them together with a pencil first, and then I carved them into the brass with small letter stamps I have owned since I was a younger man. The plate says, 3 notes and a lock. He ran a finger over the letters as if testing the edges, and then left for work with his jacket over his arm. In the evenings, we resumed Sunday dinners with a simple rule: no guests for a while. We cook what we can finish and leave nothing that needs to be explained later. The first Sunday felt ceremonial despite our agreement not to use that word. I watched Mason plate pasta the way his mother used to, twisting it just so, and for a moment the kitchen contained every year we had already lived. He poured 2 glasses of water and raised his without clinking them. "To steady hands," he said. I answered to good paper, and we both smiled at how we now measure our days. The phone rings less now. When it does, it is usually a scheduling call or the DA's office checking a box. I still keep the notebook by the phone. I still log the time. It is not superstition. It is a way of staying awake to my own life. When I lock the front door at night, the click sounds the same it did in the hard weeks. It sounds better now, because it does not have to drown out anything else. One night after Mason had gone to bed, I stood in the doorway of the library where we keep our books and maps. The air had that dry sweetness that paper gives a room. I ran a finger along the spines of titles I have carried through 3 houses, books on bridge design and coastal weather, and a battered copy of Walden I never learned to love but keep because it held a train ticket once. I thought about the folder that held together a moment in a life. It is back in the safe where it belongs, and I do not think of it unless the phone rings with a number I do not know. Even then, I do not think of her. I think of the man on the message and the choice he made and the space his choice freed up in the world. We are not done. Life is never done until it is. There will be forms and renewals and days when a smell brings back a room I do not care to visit. But there is air in the house now. There is a map on the counter with pencil marks from 2 hands. There is a list on the fridge that tells us where to put our time. There is a small brass plate under a shadow box that says 3 notes and a lock. I read it each night as I turn off the hall light. The switch clicks. The lock clicks a moment later. 2 small sounds that are big enough. A month passed and the air in the house learned us again. The porch board stopped reporting every step like a nervous witness. The coffee tasted like coffee and not like the memory that used to sit across from it. I woke before the sun and lay still and listened. 3 notes from the same bird traced a line outside the window. I waited for them to end, then rose. Some mornings quiet is an earned thing. The letter about the scholarship came first. A thin envelope with the college crest and a name typed under my wife's. The coordinator wrote that 2 students had been selected for fall, both from families where money had always gone to urgent things instead of sturdy ones. One would study building inspection and had a habit of returning library books early. The other wanted drafting because she liked the way a line can become a room. The letter asked if I wished to meet them at orientation. I read the paragraph twice. I stood at the counter a long time with my finger on my wife's name and understood that paperwork can be kindness if it is aimed right. I told Mason over breakfast. He smiled and said he hoped the inspection student liked ladders. I said I hoped she liked waiting for concrete to cure because that is where patience lives. He laughed in the quiet way a man laughs when the shape of his days has started to make sense again. The district attorney's office called to confirm the first restitution disbursement had been made to Leonard. 2 other case numbers on the list had resolved with smaller amounts. It is not a victory announcement, the investigator said, but it is the record doing what records do. I thanked her and asked if the 2 men who had reached out earlier were all right. She said they were and that they had changed their plans. I hung up and stood in the hallway with my hand on the shadow box. The small key inside did not do anything. It did not need to. Mason's counselor added a new line to his homework. Do something that takes 2 hands and no explanation. We rebuilt the small gate on the side yard. The old one never hung right. We planned the hinge style until it took the hardware without complaint, squared the frame, and stood back while the latch met the keeper like a word finding its page. When we closed it, the sound was clean. We looked at each other and nodded. Relief is not loud. It is a gate that finds its home. In early September, the court sent us a certified copy of the annulment order embossed with a seal that left a thumbprint on the page. Nadia wrote a short note on a sticky and pressed it to the folder. File this and live. A lawyer who knows where to end her sentence is a gift. I placed the order in the safe. When the door clicked, I felt that small acknowledgement in my chest that tells you an object is where it belongs. Harold stopped by with a paper bag that smelled like riverbank. 2 trout cleaned and cold. He was done with the case, he said, and had taken up fishing like a debt he finally had time to pay. We ate on the back steps with lemon and salt and the sort of silence that is not empty. He said Tyler had moved and that the last thing in his file was a single line from Aurora's counsel confirming full compliance to date. Some people try a different city, he said. They forget the person they carry goes with them. We stood a while and watched the pines lean into afternoon. He left with a promise to bring a line for Mason the next time the river asked for company. On a Tuesday, I returned a call to the country club manager. He wanted to know if we had by accident kept a small brass key tagged for their library. I told him yes, and that I had mailed it weeks ago in a padded envelope with a note. He apologized again. I told him we were finished apologizing for things we did not break. He laughed nervous, then relieved like a man who had found his way out of a hallway with too many doors. A few days later, the college orientation filled a small auditorium with parents and students and the hum of vending machines doing their work. The coordinator read the names of the scholarship recipients. The inspection student was a tall girl with careful eyes who shook my hand with a grip that belonged to someone who climbs without looking down. The drafter had calluses that did not come from a phone. I told them one sentence each. Do the math twice. Do the work once. They nodded the way people nod when they have decided to make a life out of showing up. No speeches, no photos. The kind of moment a man can put in a pocket and carry home. At home, we ate pasta, and Mason talked about a project at work that had gone sideways and then righted. He said he had handled it without tightening his jaw. He said he had slept the night before without rehearsing a fight he did not plan to have. He pointed to the list on the fridge, now creased and stained. A hike a month. A small repair each week. Sunday dinner without visitors. We were doing them more often than not. Habit is a rail that will carry you if you let it. I went into my study and opened a drawer I had not touched since the wedding. Inside was a sealed envelope addressed to Mason in my block letters. I had written it the night before the ceremony in case the library went wrong and we left alone. It said the things a man should not have to read in the cab of a car. I carried it to the kitchen and set it on the counter. Mason looked at it and then at me. He did not need to ask. I slid it into the stove and lit the burner. Paper browned, then curled, then turned to something that did not ask to be carried. We watched it a moment and then turned off the flame. Relief is sometimes a door you close on something you never had to use. Late that week, a letter arrived in a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A woman wrote that she had been engaged to a man who liked the way money sounded when it moved, and that she had almost taught herself to like it too. She wrote that she had read the public file and recognized lines of a script that had nearly become her own. She wrote thank you without names. She wrote that she had said no. I sat at the table and let the word no sit there with me. It was heavy, and it held. On Saturday, we drove west until the air changed to salt. The coast lay out like a thought you have been too busy to finish. We walked a long stretch that belonged to no one. Mason skimmed a flat stone and watched it skip 4 times. He looked younger in that light, not because years had fallen off him, but because weight had. We sat on a flat rock and watched the horizon pretend not to move. He took a breath and let it all the way out. I asked if he wanted to stop by the lodge on the way home to see the library one last time. He considered it and then shook his head. I saw it once, he said. It did what it needed to do. We do not need it to do anything more. Back in town, as evening turned the streets to bruised blue, we stopped at the hardware store for screws and a new level. The owner asked about a project, and I said a shelf in the study that had bothered me for years. He rang us up and wished us luck, as if measuring things true required luck and not patience. At home, we mounted the shelf and stepped back. The bubble found center without argument. Mason set the bird guide on it, then the map we had bought with someone else's pencil marks. He looked at me, and in that look was the man he had become inside a month that had taken a year to arrive. We ate on the porch. The new light we had installed held steady in its bracket. The street smelled faintly of cut grass and warm asphalt. Somewhere a child laughed the way only children who do not know about court filings laugh. Mason lifted his glass. To maps, he said. I answered to ledgers. We drank water like it meant something. When it was time to lock up, I stood in the hall by the shadow box. The brass plate under it caught the last light. 3 notes and a lock. It had been a joke between us at first, the way we name things to lessen their power. It is not a joke now. It is a rhythm that tells me how to live. I touched the glass with one finger the way you touch the shoulder of someone you love when words would only get in the way. I turned off the hall light. The switch clicked. I turned the deadbolt. The lock answered with its small, precise sound. 3 notes waited in the dark outside like a promise that does not need a witness. I walked to my room. Sleep did not have to hunt me. It found me the way a house finds its own shape once the scaffolding is down. Quiet, balanced standing. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing on screen.